Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the ESS Pioneer, watching the swirling clouds of Jupiter grow larger on the main screen. The ship hummed with the quiet efficiency of human engineering, its corridors filled with the familiar sounds of computers beeping and crew members going about their duties. This was supposed to be a simple test flight, nothing more than a quick jump to Jupiter's orbit and back to Earth to prove their new quantum drive technology actually worked. Chief Engineer Lisa Carter's voice crackled over the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, we're ready for the quantum drive test. All systems showing green across the board." Her tone carried the confidence of someone who had spent 3 years building this experimental engine with her own hands. The quantum drive was humanity's first real attempt at faster-than-light travel, based on theoretical physics that most scientists still argued about in universities. Jake nodded to his navigator, Amy Brooks, who sat at her station with her fingers dancing across the control panel. "Begin the startup sequence," he ordered. Around the bridge, his crew prepared for what they hoped would be humanity's first successful jump beyond the speed of light. Communications Officer Danny Walsh adjusted his headset and checked the recording equipment that would capture every detail of this historic moment. The engine room filled with a low thrumming sound as the quantum core began to spin up to operational speed. Lisa watched her instruments carefully, calling out readings to her assistant engineers. Core temperature rising to optimal levels. Quantum field generators online. We're approaching jump threshold in 30 seconds. The excitement in her voice was barely contained despite her professional demeanor. Security Chief Tony Garcia stood near the back of the bridge, his hand resting casually on his sidearm out of habit, rather than any real expectation of trouble. "Just another day at the office," he muttered to himself, though he knew this moment would probably end up in history books. Medical Officer Dr. Kevin Ross monitored the crew's vital signs from his station, making sure the unknown effects of quantum travel wouldn't harm anyone. Amy's console began flashing yellow warnings as space around the ship started to distort. "Captain, I'm seeing some unusual readings on the navigation sensors. Space-time is bending around us more than the computer models predicted." Her voice remained steady, but Jake could hear the concern underneath. This was all uncharted territory for human science. Lisa's voice came through the intercom again, but this time it carried a note of alarm. "Captain, we have a problem down here. The quantum core is pulling more power than it should. The containment field is holding, but we're generating way more energy than our calculations showed. I think we might have made an error in our theoretical framework." Before Jake could respond, the ship lurched violently to one side. Alarms began blaring throughout the bridge as every system suddenly showed red warnings. The main screen flickered and showed space itself tearing open like fabric, revealing a swirling tunnel of light and energy that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. "All hands, brace for impact," Jake called out over the ship's communication system. The ESS Pioneer was being pulled toward the tear in space despite Amy's frantic attempts to reverse course. The quantum drive had created something far beyond human understanding, and now they were being sucked into it whether they wanted to go or not. Danny's communication equipment screamed with static and interference as they entered the rift. The last thing his instruments picked up from Earth was a confused transmission from Mission Control, asking what was happening to their ship's tracking signal. Then everything went white and silent as the Pioneer disappeared from normal space-time. The journey through whatever they had accidentally created lasted either seconds or hours. Time seemed to have no meaning in the swirling tunnel of light. Jake felt his stomach drop as if he was falling, while his mind struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. Colors that had no names flashed past the viewports, and the ship's instruments gave readings that made no sense according to human physics. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything returned to normal. The Pioneer burst out of the rift into regular space, its crew shaking their heads and checking their instruments. Jake looked around the bridge to make sure everyone was still alive and accounted for. "Status report," he called out, his voice slightly hoarse from the strange experience. Lisa's voice came through the intercom, sounding puzzled but not panicked. "Engine room here, Captain. The quantum drive has shut down automatically, but all systems are showing normal. Whatever just happened, we seem to have survived it intact." Her tone suggested she was already planning to take the entire engine apart to figure out what had gone wrong. Amy stared at her navigation console with a confused expression. "Captain, according to my instruments, we're nowhere near Jupiter anymore. In fact, I can't locate any familiar star patterns. We're definitely not in our solar system. She paused, double-checking her readings. We might not even be in our galaxy. Danny's communication equipment suddenly came alive with signals, but not from Earth. Strange voices speaking in languages no human had ever heard filled his headphones. Captain, I'm picking up multiple transmissions on various frequencies. The universal translator is trying to work, but these are definitely alien languages. And sir, they sound agitated about something. Jake stood up from his command chair and walked to the main view screen. What he saw there made him pause and blink several times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. Massive ships, each one larger than anything humans had ever built, were engaged in what could only be described as a space battle. Energy beams that glowed with impossible brightness lanced between the vessels, and explosions lit up the darkness of space like miniature suns. Tony whistled softly as he joined Jake at the view screen. Well, that's something you don't see every day. Those ships look like they could crack planets in half with those weapons. His tone was more interested than frightened, like someone watching a particularly impressive fireworks display. Dr. Ross checked his medical scanners and reported that the crew showed normal vital signs despite their unexpected journey. Whatever brought us here doesn't seem to have harmed us physically, though I'd recommend we figure out where we are before we worry about how to get home. Jake watched the alien battle continue around them, noting that their small human ship seemed to be completely ignored by the warring fleets. The weapons being used could probably destroy the Pioneer without the aliens even noticing. Yet somehow they had emerged right in the middle of this conflict without being targeted. Well, team, Jake said with the calm voice of someone who had trained for unexpected situations his entire career. It looks like we've just made first contact with alien life. Amy, plot us a course around this battle. Danny, see if you can make sense of those transmissions. Lisa, I want a full diagnostic on how we got here, and everyone stay calm. We're explorers, and this is exactly the kind of thing we trained for, even if we didn't expect it to happen quite like this. The space battle around the ESS Pioneer slowly began to wind down as one fleet retreated into the distance, leaving behind debris and the victorious ships. Amy Brooks carefully navigated their small vessel around the floating wreckage, keeping them clear of any potential threats while the crew tried to understand what they had stumbled into. Danny Walsh continued monitoring the alien communications, his universal translator working overtime to decode the strange languages. Captain, I'm getting clearer signals now. It sounds like the winning fleet belongs to something called the Corvani Empire. They're conducting some kind of patrol sweep of the area, probably looking for survivors or stragglers from the losing side. Jake Morrison stood at the main view screen, watching the massive alien warships move with deadly grace through space. Each vessel was easily 10 times larger than their own ship, covered in armor plating and weapon systems that looked like they belonged in humanity's most ambitious science fiction movies. Any indication they've noticed us yet? He asked. Tony Garcia checked his security sensors and shook his head. Nothing directed our way so far, but that might change soon. Our ship is pretty small compared to theirs, but we're definitely showing up on any decent scanning equipment. As if summoned by his words, warning lights began flashing across the bridge. Amy's navigation console lit up with proximity alerts. Captain, one of the large ships is changing course toward us. It's massive, probably the size of a small city. The computer estimates it could carry a crew of several thousand. Her fingers flew over her controls, calculating possible escape routes even though they all knew their quantum drive was offline. Lisa Carter's voice came through the intercom from the engine room. Captain, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the quantum drive is completely shut down. Whatever we did to get here, we can't do it again until I figure out what went wrong. We're stuck here for the time being. Her tone suggested she was already deep into diagnostic mode, pulling apart systems to understand their malfunction. The approaching alien ship filled their view screen as it drew closer. Its hull was covered in symbols and markings that meant nothing to human eyes, but the weapon ports were unmistakable in any language. Dr. Kevin Ross monitored the crew's stress levels and was surprised to find everyone remained remarkably calm despite facing first contact with potentially hostile aliens. Danny's communication equipment suddenly crackled with a new transmission, this one clearly directed at their ship. The universal translator worked for several seconds before producing a rough translation. Unknown vessel, you will surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in your destruction. Respond within 60 seconds or face the consequences. Jake looked around his bridge crew and saw the same expression on everyone's face that he felt himself. This was exactly the kind of situation they had trained for during their years of preparation for deep space exploration. Danny, open a channel. Let's follow standard first contact protocols. He straightened his uniform and cleared his throat. The main screen flickered and showed the interior of the alien ship's bridge. The being that appeared was clearly not human, standing nearly 8 feet tall with grayish skin and wearing elaborate military decorations. His eyes were larger than human eyes, and his mouth was filled with sharp teeth that suggested a predatory, evolutionary background. I am Admiral Zexthai, of the Corvani Imperial Fleet, the alien announced in a voice that sounded like gravel being crushed. You have entered sovereign Corvani space during a military operation. Surrender your vessel immediately or be destroyed. His manner suggested someone used to instant obedience from anyone he encountered. Jake stepped forward and gave a polite nod. Greetings, Admiral. I am Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel ESS Pioneer. We appear to have arrived here accidentally due to a malfunction in our propulsion system. We mean no harm and would welcome the opportunity to discuss peaceful relations between our peoples. His tone was the same, one he might use when meeting a foreign diplomat back on Earth. Admiral. Zexthai's expression shifted slightly, as if he wasn't quite sure how to respond to such a calm and diplomatic greeting. Earth? We have no record of this world in our star charts. What species are you? And how did you acquire faster-than-light travel? His voice carried suspicion mixed with curiosity. Dr. Ross stepped up beside Jake and added, We're humans, and we'd be happy to share information about our biology and culture if you're interested in a peaceful exchange. Do you have any specific dietary requirements or environmental needs we should know about for a face-to-face meeting? His question was asked with the genuine interest of a scientist meeting a new species. The alien admiral seemed taken aback by the human approach to first contact. Most species he encountered either cowered in fear when facing the might of the Corvani Empire, or immediately attacked in desperate attempts to fight their way out. These humans were treating him like a potential business partner, rather than a conqueror. Amy looked up from her navigation console and added, Admiral, if you'd like to send representatives to our ship, we have a cargo bay that we can configure for meetings. We also have our own small shuttle if you'd prefer to meet on your vessel. Her suggestion was practical and showed no fear of the massive warship that could vaporize their entire ship, Admiral. Zexthai consulted with someone off-screen before responding. Very well, humans. I will board your vessel with my honor guard to determine what manner of beings you are. Any attempt at treachery will result in your immediate destruction. Despite his threatening words, his tone had become more puzzled than hostile. Jake turned to his crew and began issuing calm instructions. Tony, prepare the cargo bay for a diplomatic meeting. Set up the folding chairs and that conference table from storage. Lisa, can you adjust the environmental systems for potentially different atmospheric needs? Danny, prepare the standard first contact information package that includes our basic cultural and scientific data. Dr. Ross headed toward the medical bay to gather equipment for biological scans, treating this like any other scientific opportunity. I'll prepare some basic medical supplies in case there are any allergic reactions or compatibility issues. This should be fascinating from a xenobiology perspective. The crew moved with efficient purpose, transforming their cargo bay into a diplomatic meeting space. They brought out their best coffee maker and set up a small refreshment station following Earth protocols for hosting foreign dignitaries. The fact that these particular dignitaries belonged to what sounded like a galactic military empire didn't seem to concern them greatly. Within an hour, Admiral Zexthai and his honor guard materialized in the cargo bay via some kind of teleportation technology. The alien warriors were impressive figures in elaborate armor, carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. They looked around the simple human cargo bay with expressions that suggested they expected something more elaborate or threatening. Jake greeted them with the same diplomatic courtesy he would show any visiting delegation, offering seats and refreshments while explaining basic human customs and the purpose of their mission of peaceful exploration. Admiral Zexthai stood in the cargo bay of the ESS Pioneer, looking around at the simple human meeting space with growing confusion. His honor guard flanked him on either side, their weapons ready but lowered as they tried to understand these strange aliens who showed no fear of the mighty Corvani Empire. The humans had offered them coffee and asked polite questions about their biological needs, treating them like welcome guests rather than conquerors. Jake Morrison sat across from the Admiral at the folding table, sipping his coffee and reviewing the basic information packet that Danny Walsh had prepared about human culture and history. "Admiral, we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. We're always excited to learn about new civilizations and share knowledge about our own." His tone remained friendly and professional, as if this were a routine diplomatic meeting. The alien admiral's large eyes narrowed as he studied the humans. In his centuries of military service, he had encountered countless species across the galaxy, and they all reacted the same way when faced with Corvani power. They either surrendered immediately, begged for mercy, or fought desperately before being crushed. These humans were doing none of those things, and it disturbed him greatly. "Tell me, humans," Admiral Zexthai said, his gravelly voice filled with suspicion. "Do you understand the power of the Corvani Empire? We have conquered half this galaxy through superior technology and military might. Entire star systems bow before our authority." He leaned forward, expecting to see fear or submission in their eyes. Dr. Kevin Ross looked up from his medical scanner, which he was using to study the aliens' biology with their permission. "That's quite impressive from a logistical standpoint. How do you manage the administrative challenges of governing so many different worlds? The communication delays alone must create significant bureaucratic difficulties." His question was asked with genuine scientific curiosity rather than awe. Amy Brooks, who had been quietly taking notes about the aliens' technology, added her own observation. "Your faster-than-light travel seems much more advanced than ours. How do you handle the resource distribution across such a large territory? We've run computer models on Earth about the challenges of interstellar government, and the numbers get pretty complex pretty quickly." Admiral Zexthai found himself answering their practical questions rather than inspiring terror, which frustrated him enormously. "We use a system of regional governors and military oversight. Worlds that resist are made examples of to ensure compliance from others." He said this expecting gasps of horror or pleas for mercy from the humans. Tony Garcia nodded thoughtfully. "That's similar to several historical empires on Earth. The Romans used a comparable approach, though they eventually ran into sustainability issues around the 3rd century. How do you handle succession planning and preventing regional governors from becoming too independent?" His question sounded like something from a military academy rather than a terrified prisoner. The Admiral's confusion deepened. These humans were discussing his empire's methods like academics studying ancient history, rather than potential victims learning about their doom. He decided to take a different approach and see if a demonstration of power would produce the proper fear response. "Perhaps you would benefit from seeing the true scope of Corvani civilization," Admiral Zexthai announced, standing up from the table. "I will escort your vessel to our capital world, so you can understand what it means to face our empire." His tone suggested this was both an invitation and a threat. Jake looked around at his crew and saw the same expression of interest on their faces that he felt himself. This was exactly the kind of opportunity they had hoped for when they began their exploration mission. "We'd be honored to visit your capital world, Admiral. It would be a valuable chance for cultural exchange and scientific observation." Lisa Carter's voice came through the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, I still need more time to figure out our quantum drive problems. A trip to their capital might give me the chance to study their propulsion systems and maybe learn something useful." Her tone suggested she was more interested in the engineering aspects than any potential danger. Admiral Zexthai ordered his fleet to escort the human ship to Corvax Prime, the heart of the Corvani Empire. The journey took several days through hyperspace, during which the humans continued their polite questions about alien technology and culture. The Admiral found himself giving detailed explanations about Imperial history and military tactics to an audience that treated it like an educational documentary. When they emerged from hyperspace near Corvax Prime, the humans gathered on their bridge to observe the capital world of a galactic empire. The planet was completely covered in massive cities that housed 50 billion beings from dozens of conquered species. Gigantic orbital platforms surrounded the world, bristling with weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. Danny Walsh recorded everything with his communication equipment while providing running commentary. "The scale of this civilization is incredible. The energy requirements alone for a planet-wide city must be enormous. I wonder how they handle waste management and resource recycling with that many inhabitants. His observations sounded more like a nature documentary than someone witnessing an overwhelming display of power. Dr. Ross studied the orbital weapons platforms through his medical scanner, noting their design and probable function. Those look like they could sterilize a planet's surface pretty efficiently, similar to some of the theoretical weapons our military planners have discussed, though obviously much more advanced in their implementation. Admiral Zextai brought the human ship down to the planet's surface, landing at the Imperial Capital Complex. The massive structures rose kilometers into the sky, built from materials that gleamed like metal and stone combined. Millions of beings moved through the streets below, going about their daily lives under the absolute rule of the Corvani Empire. The humans were given a guided tour designed to demonstrate the futility of resistance against such overwhelming power. They were shown gladiatorial arenas where prisoners from rebellious worlds fought to the death for the entertainment of Imperial citizens. The crowds cheered as beings killed each other with primitive weapons while advanced technology kept the battles going until only one fighter remained alive. Maria Santos, the expedition's anthropologist, watched the gladiatorial games with the same detached interest she might show toward ancient Roman historical records. The social dynamics are fascinating. Public spectacles like this usually serve to channel popular frustration away from the ruling class. Do you find that worlds with these kinds of entertainments have lower rates of civil unrest? She asked the admiral. They were taken to massive factories where enslaved species from conquered worlds labored to produce goods for the empire. The working conditions were harsh and the overseers carried weapons to enforce compliance. Millions of beings worked in dangerous conditions with no hope of freedom, their lives measured only by their productive output. Lisa Carter observed the manufacturing processes with professional interest. Your production efficiency could probably be improved by about 15% with better workflow management. Also, those atmospheric scrubbers look like they're running at less than optimal capacity. You might want to check the filter systems. Her suggestions were offered in the same helpful tone she might use when consulting on Earth industrial projects. Emperor Thaklan sat on his massive throne in the heart of the Imperial Palace, surrounded by the skulls of defeated enemies and weapons capable of destroying entire star systems. The throne room was designed to crush the spirit of anyone who entered, with its soaring ceilings covered in the preserved remains of species that had dared to resist Corvani rule. Admiral Zextai had requested this audience because he could not understand these strange humans who seemed immune to intimidation. The taut human delegation walked into the throne room with the same calm professionalism they had shown throughout their visit to Korvax Prime. Jake Morrison led the group, carrying a small diplomatic case containing gifts from Earth, according to standard first contact protocols. Behind him came Dr. Kevin Ross, Maria Santos, and Colonel Ray Henderson, who had been awakened from his off-duty rest to serve as military advisor for this important meeting. Emperor Thakalon was an imposing figure even by Corvani standards, standing nearly 9 feet tall with battle scars covering his arms and ceremonial armor that had been forged from the metals of conquered worlds. His eyes glowed with a fierce intelligence that had guided the Empire through decades of successful conquest. He expected these primitive aliens to fall to their knees in terror when they saw the full majesty of imperial power. Instead, Jake approached the throne with the respectful but unimpressed bearing of a career diplomat meeting another head of state. Your Imperial Majesty, we are honored by this audience. I am Captain Jake Morrison, representing humanity and the planet Earth. We come in peace and friendship, hoping to establish positive relations between our peoples. He bowed slightly, showing respect without submission. The Emperor's eyes narrowed as he studied these strange beings who showed no fear in his presence. So you are the humans that Admiral Zextai tells me about, the ones who look upon our Empire's might and show no proper terror. Perhaps you do not understand what you face here. His voice echoed through the throne room like thunder, designed to make lesser beings tremble. Dr. Ross stepped forward and offered a polite smile. We understand that you rule a very large and powerful civilization, Your Majesty. We've been quite impressed by the scale of your achievements. The logistics alone must be incredibly complex. His tone was the same, one he might use when complementing a colleague's research project. Jake opened his diplomatic case and withdrew several items that had been carefully selected to represent human culture. We've brought some gifts from Earth as tokens of friendship. These coffee beans are from one of our most valued agricultural regions. This chocolate represents one of our favorite foods. And these recordings contain examples of human music and literature that we hope you might find interesting. Emperor Thaklon stared at the simple gifts with growing frustration. Species that came before his throne usually offered vast treasures, desperate bribes, or pleas for mercy. These humans were giving him coffee beans and music as if he were some minor planetary leader, rather than the ruler of half the galaxy. "Do you mock me with these trivial offerings?" he demanded. Maria Santos spoke up with the enthusiasm of an anthropologist meeting a new culture. "Not at all, Your Majesty. Gift-giving is an important part of human diplomatic tradition. These items represent things that are meaningful in our society. We'd be very interested to learn about your own cultural traditions and perhaps receive similar tokens of Corvani civilization." The Emperor decided that a demonstration of absolute power might finally produce the proper fear response from these infuriating aliens. He gestured toward a massive weapon mounted near his throne. Its barrel pointed toward a viewport that showed the stars beyond the planet. "Perhaps you need to see what happens to those who displease the Corvani Empire. This weapon can destroy an entire star system. Watch as I demonstrate our power by eliminating a nearby solar system that harbors rebels." Colonel Ray Henderson studied the weapon with professional interest rather than terror. "That's quite an impressive piece of engineering, Your Majesty. The energy requirements must be enormous. Have you considered the ecological impact of stellar destruction? The radiation burst alone would probably sterilize every planet within several light years." His question sounded like someone reviewing a military equipment proposal. Dr. Ross added his own concerns in the same helpful tone he might use when consulting on a medical procedure. There would also be significant refugee problems to consider. Destroying a star system would probably displace millions of beings who would need resettlement. Have you worked out the humanitarian logistics for that kind of population movement? Emperor Thaklon found himself listening to a lecture about responsible governance instead of witnessing the terror he expected. "You question my methods?" he roared, his voice shaking the massive throne room. "I am the ruler of the greatest empire this galaxy has ever seen. Entire species exist only because I allow them to live." Jake nodded politely and responded in the same diplomatic tone he had maintained throughout the meeting. "We certainly respect your authority over your territory, Your Majesty. We're just curious about the long-term sustainability of your approach. On Earth, we've found that systems based purely on force tend to face certain challenges over time, particularly around succession planning and resource allocation." Maria Santos pulled out a small tablet and began referencing historical data. Human history shows that conquest-based empires typically face internal pressures after about 2 to 3 centuries unless they adapt their governance models. The administrative costs of maintaining control through force alone tend to exceed the economic benefits of conquest once you reach a certain territorial size. The Emperor's confusion was turning to anger as these aliens continued to treat his empire like a case study rather than an overwhelming force. "You dare to lecture me about governance? I have conquered worlds while your species was still crawling in mud." His threats were becoming more personal as his patience wore thin. Colonel Henderson maintained his calm military bearing as he responded. "That's certainly an impressive achievement, Your Majesty. Coordinating military operations across galactic distances must present some interesting strategic challenges. How do you handle communication delays when directing campaigns in distant sectors? Do you rely on local commanders having significant tactical autonomy?" Dr. Ross had been quietly observing the Emperor's behavior and physical responses throughout the meeting. "Your Majesty, you might want to consider some stress management techniques. Your cardiovascular system is showing signs of elevated pressure, which could impact your long-term health. We've developed some effective relaxation methods on Earth that might help with the demands of ruling such a large territory." The Emperor stood up from his throne, his massive form towering over the humans, and pointed one clawed finger at Jake Morrison. "You will show proper respect for imperial authority, or you will learn what happens to those who defy the Corvani Empire. I have ended civilizations for far less than your insolence." His voice had become a threatening growl that would have terrified any other species. "Jake, looked up at the Emperor with the same calm expression he had worn throughout their visit. "We certainly mean no disrespect, Your Majesty. We're simply sharing our observations based on human experience with similar governmental structures. If there's anything about our own history that might be useful to your administration, we'd be happy to provide more detailed information." Emperor Thaklon stood before his throne, breathing heavily from his failed attempts to intimidate the humans. His greatest weapons, his most terrifying threats, and his overwhelming displays of power had all been met with polite curiosity and helpful suggestions. Admiral Zextai watched from the side of the throne room, equally frustrated by these strange aliens who seemed immune to fear. "What does it take to frighten you people?" the Emperor finally demanded, his voice filled with genuine confusion rather than anger. "I have shown you the might of the greatest empire in galactic history. I have threatened to destroy star systems. I have displayed the bones of my enemies and the weapons that ended civilizations. Yet you stand there offering me coffee and advice about government administration." Jake Morrison looked around at his fellow humans and saw the same puzzled expression on their faces that he felt himself. They had assumed this was still part of the cultural exchange, a chance to learn about each other's societies and perhaps establish peaceful diplomatic relations. The idea that they were supposed to be terrified hadn't really occurred to them. "I suppose that's a fair question, Your Majesty," Jake replied thoughtfully. "What frightens humans? That's actually quite a complex topic. Dr. Ross, you've studied human psychology. What would you say genuinely scares our species?" His tone suggested he was treating this as an interesting philosophical discussion, rather than a threat assessment. Dr. Kevin Ross adjusted his medical scanner and considered the question seriously.
"Well, from a psychological standpoint, humans tend to fear things that threaten our long-term survival as a species.
Immediate physical threats are certainly concerning, but we've evolved to handle those pretty well. It's the slow, inevitable dangers that really keep us awake at night." Maria Santos pulled out her tablet and began scrolling through historical data. "Sociologically speaking, humans are most frightened by threats we can't control or predict. Natural disasters, economic collapse, social breakdown, that sort of thing. We've developed pretty good coping mechanisms for direct confrontation, but uncertainty about the future tends to create significant anxiety." Colonel Ray Henderson nodded in agreement. "From a military perspective, humans have been dealing with existential threats for most of our recorded history. We've fought wars where millions of people died over ideological differences. We've developed weapons capable of ending our entire civilization multiple times over. We've faced plagues that killed significant portions of our population." Emperor Thaklon and Admiral Zextai exchanged glances, starting to realize that this conversation was taking an unexpected turn. They had wanted to know what would frighten these aliens, but the humans seemed to be treating it as an academic discussion about their species' psychology and history. Jake continued the explanation in the same calm tone he had used throughout their visit. "For example, we've had several periods in our history where nuclear war was a constant possibility. Entire generations grew up knowing that our civilization could end in a matter of hours if the wrong political decisions were made. We had children practicing emergency drills in schools, learning to hide under desks in case of atomic attacks." Dr. Ross added his own perspective on human resilience. "We've also dealt with global pandemics that spread across our entire planet in a matter of months. Diseases that had no cure, killing people regardless of age or social status. Our entire economic and social systems had to adapt to the possibility that leaving your house might mean death." Maria Santos found a relevant section in her historical database. "Climate change has been another ongoing existential threat. We've had to face the possibility that our own industrial activity might make our planet uninhabitable. Rising temperatures, changing weather patterns, mass extinctions of other species, the kind of slow environmental collapse that takes decades to fully manifest." Colonel Henderson described military threats with the same matter-of-fact tone. "We've developed artificial intelligence systems that might eventually become more capable than human beings. The possibility that we might create something that could replace or eliminate us entirely. We've run computer simulations of asteroid impacts that could cause global extinction, events similar to what happened to the dinosaurs." The alien emperor was listening with growing horror as the humans casually described threats that would have terrified any known species. They were talking about planetary destruction, species extinction, and technological apocalypse as if these were normal parts of daily life rather than ultimate nightmares. Jake noticed the Emperor's expression and misinterpreted it as academic interest. Of course, we've also had more immediate threats throughout our history. World wars where entire continents were battlefields, volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for years, ice ages that covered most of our planet in frozen wasteland, economic depressions where social order nearly collapsed. Dr. Ross continued with medical examples. We've survived genetic bottlenecks where our entire species was reduced to just a few thousand individuals. Plagues like the Black Death that killed 1/3 of our population, famines that lasted for years. We've had to learn to survive in environments that actively try to kill us. Maria Santos shared anthropological data about human survival. Our species has lived through the rise and fall of countless civilizations. We've seen empires that seemed permanent crumble into dust. We've experienced religious wars, political revolutions, and social upheavals that destroyed everything people thought they knew about their world. Admiral Zexthai was staring at the humans with an expression approaching terror. You mean to tell me that your species regularly faces extinction-level threats, and you just adapt to them as normal parts of life? His voice had lost all its earlier authority and carried a note of genuine fear. Colonel Henderson shrugged in a way that suggested this was obvious. Pretty much, yes. By the time we developed space travel, we had already survived everything from nuclear standoffs to climate disasters to pandemic diseases. We've learned to function under the assumption that civilization might end at any moment, so we just do our best with whatever time we have. Jake smiled in what he thought was a reassuring manner. That's probably why your empire doesn't seem particularly threatening to us, Your Majesty. Compared to the existential risks humans face every day, a conquest-based government seems like a fairly manageable political problem. We've dealt with similar systems throughout our history, Dr. Ross added helpfully. Plus, your threats are direct and immediate, which humans actually handle pretty well. It's the slow, inevitable dangers that really worry us. Nuclear war, climate change, artificial intelligence, asteroid impacts, pandemic diseases, economic collapse. Your empire is certainly powerful, but it's not really an extinction-level threat to our species. Emperor Thakalon slowly sat back down on his throne, his massive form seeming smaller than before. He looked at Admiral Zexthai with an expression that contained more fear than either alien had ever felt facing an enemy fleet. These humans were describing a level of existential terror that made galactic conquest seem like a minor political disagreement. Admiral, the Emperor said quietly, prepare immediate passage for these humans back to the edge of our territory. Provide them with whatever supplies they need for their journey, and mark their region of space as permanently restricted. No Corvani vessel is to approach their system under any circumstances. His voice carried the authority of absolute command mixed with genuine terror. Jake looked confused by the sudden change in the Emperor's demeanor. Your Majesty, if we've offended you in some way, we certainly didn't intend to. We've enjoyed learning about your civilization and would welcome continued diplomatic contact. His offer was made with sincere friendliness. The Emperor shook his head firmly. No further contact will be necessary. We wish your species well in your travels, but the Corvani Empire has no desire for further interaction with beings who consider galactic conquest to be a minor inconvenience. His tone suggested he was trying very hard to remain polite while getting rid of them as quickly as possible.